Welcome to AppleKnows channel. My name is Apple and today I am going to tell you a story that might change the way you look at ships and boats forever. You may think you already know about the Titanic or modern cruise liners, but what if I told you there are facts about ships so strange and so unbelievable that they sound like fiction, yet every single one of them is true? Let me take you on a long voyage through history and the oceans of secrets. Imagine this. There is a ship so large that when it was built, people thought the Earth itself might not have space for it. This was the Seawise Giant, also known as Knock Nevis. At over 1,500 feet long, it was the largest moving man-made object ever built. It was so big that it could not pass through the English Channel or the Panama Canal. When it carried oil, it displaced more water than some small lakes. It was once sunk during the Iran-Iraq War, but later refloated and returned to service. Just think of it, an oil tanker bigger than the Empire State Building laid on its side. Now here is something even stranger. Wooden ships, especially from ancient times, could last far longer underwater than you might expect. In 2018, archaeologists discovered a Greek trading ship at the bottom of the Black Sea, more than 2,400 years old, lying perfectly preserved. The mast, the rudder, even the benches where the rowers once sat, all still there, untouched by time. The reason? The Black Sea at certain depths has no oxygen, so wood-eating organisms cannot survive. It's like a time capsule waiting silently in the dark. And have you ever heard about ghost ships? One of the most famous is the Mary Celeste, found drifting near the Azores in 1872. The ship was in perfect condition, cargo intact, food supply still on board, but not a single crew member was ever found. To this day, no one knows what happened. Some suggest pirates, others mutiny, or even seaquakes. But the truth is lost forever in the waves, making it one of the greatest maritime mysteries in history. But ships are not only about mysteries, they also hold shocking records. The fastest recorded speed of a human-powered boat is not what you might think. In 1991, a hydrofoil pedaled by cyclist Greg Kolodziejczyk reached almost 20 miles per hour on water. That is faster than many small motorboats. It proves that with the right design, even muscle power can rival engines. And here's another fact that bends belief. Some of the deadliest maritime disasters in history are almost unknown compared to the Titanic. For example, the Wilhelm Gustloff, a German ship carrying refugees in 1945, was torpedoed by a Soviet submarine. Over 9,000 people died, making it the deadliest sinking of a single ship in history. Yet very few people outside historians have even heard of it. The Titanic had around 1,500 deaths, but the Gustloff tragedy was 6 times greater. Even boats built for peace have caused surprise. In World War II, the United States constructed ships made partially from concrete. Yes, concrete. The theory was that steel was in short supply, so concrete hulls would save resources. They floated, they sailed, and some of them are still around as breakwaters today. The idea of a concrete ship may sound absurd, but it worked. Now let me give you something you might not forget soon. In the late 19th century, a luxury steamship called the SS Valencia ran aground near Vancouver Island. Rescue efforts failed and nearly 140 people died. Years later, reports surfaced of a lifeboat from the Valencia spotted floating perfectly intact, decades after the wreck. Fishermen swore they saw ghostly visions of people rowing it. The wreck gave rise to local legends of phantom ships haunting the coast. There is something mesmerizing about how ships carry both glory and tragedy. Take the case of the Japanese battleship Yamato, the heaviest battleship ever built. Launched during World War II, it weighed more than 70,000 tons when fully loaded and carried massive 18-inch guns, the largest naval artillery ever mounted on a warship. But despite its unmatched firepower, Yamato was sunk in 1945 during its final mission, overwhelmed by waves of American aircraft. The ship was so immense that survivors described the sinking as if a floating city had collapsed beneath them. And here is a fact few believe at first. In 1986, researchers discovered the wreck of the Titanic almost 73 years after it went down. What shocked them was not just the condition of the ship but the strange iron-eating bacteria consuming it. These organisms, which thrive deep in the ocean where no sunlight reaches, slowly eat away the iron hull, forming rust stalactites called rusticles. Scientists predict that in less than 20 years, the Titanic could completely collapse and vanish. The greatest maritime icon in modern history is literally being eaten alive by nature. But ships are not just about size or disaster. Sometimes the smallest vessels achieve the greatest feats. In 1965, Robert Manry, an editor from Ohio, sailed alone across the Atlantic Ocean in a boat just 13.5 feet long. The boat was so tiny that most people thought he was insane. Yet he made it, enduring storms, near collisions with giant ships, and weeks of solitude at sea. When he arrived in England, thousands of people greeted him like a hero. A man in a boat barely bigger than a bathtub had conquered the Atlantic. Here's another story to test your sense of belief. The Swedish warship Vasa, built in the 1600s, was meant to be the pride of the Swedish Navy. Decorated with over 700 sculptures and armed with dozens of cannons, it was a floating masterpiece of power and art. But on its very first voyage in 1628, after sailing less than a mile, it tipped over and sank in Stockholm harbor. For centuries it lay underwater, but when it was recovered in the 20th century, it was so well preserved that it is now a museum piece. Visitors today can see the Vasa almost as it looked 4 centuries ago, standing as both a marvel and a mistake. And here is one more to shake your sense of reality. There are ships still drifting without crews, modern ghost ships, abandoned by owners or caught in storms, wandering the seas until they run aground. In 2012, a Russian cruise ship called the Lyubov Orlova broke free while being towed and drifted into the North Atlantic. It was believed to be filled with rats that had turned cannibal to survive. Though never officially found again, reports of unidentified drifting vessels have fueled speculation that the ship may still be out there, lost and empty. One of the strangest truths about ships is how they sometimes vanish without leaving a single trace. The SS Warata, an Australian passenger ship known as the Titanic of the South, disappeared in 1909 with more than 200 people on board. It was last seen sailing near Durban, South Africa, and then it was gone. Despite over a century of searches, wreck hunters, sonar scans, and countless expeditions, not one piece of the Warata has ever been found. How does a massive steel ship vanish into nothing? The ocean swallowed it whole, leaving behind only mystery. And then there are ships that defy the rules of what we think is possible. In 2010, researchers found the world's oldest intact shipwreck, a 2,400-year-old Greek trading vessel resting on the floor of the Black Sea. What made it shocking was that the ship looked like it had sunk yesterday. Even the wood carving of a seahorse on the stern was still visible. Think about that, a ship older than the Roman Empire, preserved as if it was just abandoned, untouched by time because of the oxygen-free waters. But some maritime facts are even darker. The deadliest maritime disaster in peacetime is not Titanic, but the sinking of the MV Dona Paz in the Philippines in 1987. The passenger ferry collided with an oil tanker, sparking a fire so massive it turned the sea into flames. More than 4,000 people died, many trapped in the blaze or drowning in the chaos. Yet outside of Asia, very few have even heard of it. History remembers Titanic, but tragedies like Dona Paz remain shadows. Ships have also been used in ways you would never imagine. During World War II, Britain created an experimental plan to build aircraft carriers out of ice. Yes, ice. The project was called Habakkuk. Scientists mixed water with wood pulp to create a frozen composite called picrete, which was stronger than steel in some conditions. A prototype was even built in Canada, and it floated. The plan was eventually abandoned, but for a moment in history, the idea of warships made of ice was very real. And then there is the haunting story of the SS Aurang Medan, a ship rumored to have been found adrift in the 1940s. When rescuers boarded, they found the entire crew dead, their faces twisted in terror, arms pointing towards something unseen. No injuries, no signs of struggle, just death. Then, before the ship could be towed, it mysteriously caught fire and sank. To this day, many debate whether the Aurang Medan ever truly existed, but reports of it appeared in multiple newspapers. If real, it remains one of the most chilling maritime mysteries ever recorded. Some of the most jaw-dropping facts about ships come from how far back humanity's relationship with the sea goes. The oldest known seafaring boats date back more than 10,000 years. Archaeologists in Kuwait discovered remains of reed boats coated with bitumen that prehistoric people used to cross open water. That means humans were capable of organized seafaring thousands of years before the pyramids of Egypt were even built. The sea has always been both our pathway and our test. And here is a fact that turns the idea of unsinkable upside down. In 1941, the HMS Ark Royal, a British aircraft carrier, was struck by a single torpedo. Despite having dozens of watertight compartments and advanced design for the era, the ship capsized and sank within a day. It showed that even the most advanced naval engineering can fail against the unpredictable power of the ocean and war. But the strangeness is not always about sinking. Some ships were simply too large to be practical. The Soviet Union once designed a massive ikranoplan, part plane, part ship called the Caspian Sea Monster. It skimmed above the water's surface using ground effect, carrying heavy loads at high speeds. To Western spies who first saw satellite images, it looked impossible, as if the Soviets had built a flying battleship. Though technically not a ship in the classic sense, it was classified as one, and remains one of the strangest maritime machines ever made. Let's not forget the bizarre materials ships have been built from. During shortages in World War I and II, not only concrete ships but also wooden aircraft carriers were designed and tested. In Canada, an entire carrier deck was built from Douglas fir timber to train pilots in takeoffs and landings. Against all logic, it worked, and pilots practiced on what was essentially a floating wooden runway. And then there are the shipwrecks that keep rewriting history. In 1960, explorers found the wreck of the Uluburun ship off the coast of Turkey. It dated back to 1300 BCE and carried cargo from at least 7 different regions: copper from Cyprus, tin from Central Asia, glass from Mesopotamia, ivory from Africa. This single shipwreck proved that Bronze Age trade was global, connecting civilizations thousands of miles apart long before anyone thought possible. Think for a moment about ships that were designed not to sail across oceans but to live forever beneath them. Submarines are technically ships too, and some of their stories defy imagination. In the 1960s, the USS Thresher, a nuclear-powered submarine, tragically sank during sea trials. What shocked investigators was the realization that the immense pressure at such depths crushed the steel hull like a tin can in seconds. It revealed just how unforgiving the ocean truly is, capable of destroying even the most advanced engineering of its time with no hesitation. Now here is a fact few ever hear. The RMS Titanic, the most famous shipwreck in history, is not the deepest sunken passenger liner. That title belongs to the SS Rio Grande, which sank in the South Atlantic in 1941. Its wreck was discovered almost 5,800 meters below the surface, so deep that few vehicles on Earth are capable of even reaching it. Imagine an entire ship lying quietly in the crushing black silence of the abyss, deeper than most mountains are tall. And some ships were so unusual in concept they seem like myths. In the 1800s, a man named Isambard Kingdom Brunel designed the SS Great Eastern, a steamship so massive it could carry 4,000 passengers across the Atlantic without refueling. It was 5 times bigger than any ship of its era. But here's the strange part: despite being an engineering marvel, it was plagued with bad luck. During construction, workers died mysteriously inside its double hull and were sealed there unknowingly. Rumors spread that the ship was cursed, and had never achieved the success Brunel hoped for. Then there are ships that should have been destroyed but refused to die. The USS Constitution, nicknamed Old Ironsides, fought in the War of 1812. During battle, cannonballs fired by enemy ships bounced off its wooden hull, as if the ship were made of iron. Sailors cheered that it was invincible, and today, more than 200 years later, it is still afloat, making it the oldest commissioned warship still sailing in the world. And sometimes, the strangest things are not about war or disasters, but about survival. In 1942, the British merchant ship SS Ben Lomond was sunk by a German submarine. Only one man survived, Poon Lim, a Chinese sailor. He lived alone on a wooden raft for 133 days, drinking rainwater, catching fish, and even fending off sharks. He holds the record for the longest time a single human has survived alone adrift at sea. When he was finally rescued, he calmly stepped onto the deck of the rescue ship and said, "I survived." Some ships become legends not because of how they sailed, but because of how they refused to sink. Take the German battleship Bismarck. When it launched in 1939, it was one of the most powerful warships ever built, armed to destroy entire fleets. In 1941, after a massive battle, the Royal Navy managed to cripple it, but here's the twist: despite endless shelling and torpedoes, many historians and divers believe the ship was scuttled by its own crew. The Bismarck would rather die at its own hand than surrender, and even at the bottom of the Atlantic today, its hull still shows just how impossible it was to destroy. And here is a fact most people never realize. The ocean's currents carry ghost ships across the world in silence. In 2006, a small fishing boat was found drifting near Australia. Inside were the mummified remains of a German sailor, Manfred Fritz Beijerinck, who had been dead for years, preserved by the salty air and dry winds. His yacht, the Sao, had circled the seas as a floating coffin. It is one of the most haunting modern maritime discoveries ever recorded. Not all unbelievable ship stories are tragedies, though. In 1969, the Queen Elizabeth II, one of the most famous cruise liners of the 20th century, was used to secretly transport troops during the Falklands War. A ship designed for luxury suddenly became a military vessel, with soldiers sleeping in ballrooms and eating in grand dining halls that only weeks earlier had hosted wealthy tourists. It was a reminder that even the most glamorous ships can be called into the darkest of duties. But perhaps nothing shatters expectations more than the story of the SS Beichimo. This cargo steamer was abandoned in 1931 after being trapped in Arctic ice. Everyone assumed it had sunk, yet for decades afterward, it was spotted drifting through the frozen north, completely unmanned. Inuit hunters, explorers, and even passing ships reported seeing it again and again. The Beichimo became a true ghost ship of the Arctic, wandering for nearly 40 years before vanishing for good. To this day, no one knows where it finally rests. And then there is the brutal scale of naval warfare. During World War II, more than 3,500 merchant ships were sunk in the Battle of the Atlantic alone, sending millions of tons of cargo and countless lives to the bottom. But what shocks most is that despite such staggering loss, global trade continued. Ships were being sunk faster than they could be built, yet the ocean lanes never fully closed. Human determination to cross the seas has always been stronger than the fear of losing them. Some ships are remembered not for their size or power, but for the eerie mysteries tied to them. One of the most chilling stories belongs to the Octavius, a ghost ship supposedly discovered in 1775 off the coast of Greenland. When boarding parties entered, they found the crew frozen solid, sitting at their posts as if time itself had stopped. The captain was still in his chair with a pen in hand, and the logbook suggested the ship had been trapped in ice for more than a decade before drifting free. Whether legend or truth, the Octavius became a symbol of how merciless the polar seas can be. And then there are the staggering feats of endurance at sea. In 1969, Robin Knox Johnston became the first person to sail solo nonstop around the world. But what few realize is that during the same race, another sailor, Donald Crowhurst, faked his progress on the charts, sending false reports while he drifted in the South Atlantic. When the truth closed in, his abandoned boat was found, logbooks filled with haunting entries about his mental breakdown. One man survived eternal glory, the other became a tragic reminder of how the sea can break even the strongest minds. Not all shocking ship stories are human tragedies. In 2014, divers exploring Lake Michigan found a schooner called the Alvin Clark that had sunk in 1864. When they raised it more than a century later, it was in such good condition that the interior looked almost new. But here's the eerie part: after placing it in a museum, the ship rapidly decayed and collapsed within just a few years. Preserved perfectly by the cold freshwater depths, it could not survive once pulled into the open air. The ship was safer under the lake than it was on land. And then we must talk about fire at sea, which can be even more terrifying than sinking. In 1934, the passenger liner Morro Castle caught fire off the coast of New Jersey. With no functioning radios and chaos on board, the fire spread so fast that passengers were forced to jump into the ocean. More than 130 people died, and the burning wreck washed up onto a beach, where crowds gathered to stare in horror at the blackened shell. It was such a shocking disaster that it led directly to new maritime safety regulations. But nothing shows the strange dual nature of ships better than the story of the SS Great Britain. Built in 1843, it was the first large ocean-going ship made of iron and powered by a screw propeller. It was abandoned in the Falkland Islands decades later, left to rust and rot. And yet in 1970, it was salvaged and towed back across the Atlantic on a floating pontoon. Today, restored in Bristol, it still stands as one of the most important ships in history, proof that even a forgotten wreck can rise again. And so, my friends, this was Apple from AppleKnows channel, and what you've just heard is only a glimpse into the astonishing, haunting, and unforgettable truths about ships and boats. From vessels that refused to sink to ghost ships that sailed without crews, from ancient wrecks preserved for millennia to modern giants lost in minutes, the ocean has always proven that reality is stranger than any story we could invent. Ships are not just machines, they are floating histories, monuments to human ambition, and sometimes, chilling reminders of our fragility against the sea. Thank you for sailing with me through these unbelievable but true facts. Until next time, keep your curiosity alive, because the ocean still holds countless secrets waiting to surface. This was AppleKnows channel, see you on the next voyage.